Right, section 1 of your NEA. So you can see the NEA is split into multiple sections. The maximum marks is 100, and you have 3 assessment objectives on the left hand side here, which are then split into these smaller sections here, each worth a different amount of marks. But in this video we're going to look at assessment objective 1, section A, and we're going to look at identifying and investigating design possibilities, which is the maximum marks of 10. Now that sounds like a small amount of marks, however you need to get this section correct, otherwise you won't be able to access the rest of the marks later on. So in terms of how it's marked, it's split into multiple bands. So you can see the top band here is 9 to 10 marks, 6 to 8 marks for the second band, third band is 3 to 5 marks, and there is actually a hidden band at the bottom here that I've decided not to show because obviously you don't want to be aiming for 1 or 2 marks, and it's actually not difficult to get good marks in this section so long as you follow the advice. Now if, let me just bring up the highlighter quickly, if we look at the sections and what it's asking for you, you can see in terms of how you move from one band to another, it's kind of down to wording. So if I looked at an excellent understanding of the design problems and opportunities compared to a good understanding, okay, or an adequate understanding. So the wording of it is quite difficult to get your head around, but it just basically means how much detail and how focused have you been on each section. So again, a comprehensive investigation, whereas you got things like a detailed investigation or even some investigation. The 1 to 2 marks is even worse than that. So it's all down to how much detail you're going to go into. So if I just bring up the top mark scheme here, the top mark band. So let's take each section individually. So we've got section 1, or part 1 should we say, which is saying design possibilities identified and thoroughly explored. So to me that's going to be things like your mind map and your design problems. You can see that you've got design problems and opportunities. So what is the problem and how could you solve it? So could solve it, not will solve it, but could solve it. You've got your user and client has been clearly identified. It's entirely relevant. So if you're doing something in the kitchen, for example, some sort of cooking aid, is your client a chef or is it just your mum? It needs to be someone a little bit more relevant. A chef is a really good example. They're an expert in their field. If you're doing some sort of teaching aid, a teacher is a really relevant client to have because, they are an expert. They're a paid professional in their area. You need to identify their needs and wants from a product and explain the justification of these needs and wants. And that's what we're going to focus on in this video. So just those 2 sections, there's a couple of key points to go through. I'm going to show you what I've done. Now, really important before I do, that you understand there is no set way to present your work or what needs to be on page 1, what needs to be on page 2, what needs to be on page 3, etc. There is no requirement. This is a section. So this section could take you 10 pages, it could take you 2 pages. It's entirely up to you what it looks like, how you present your work, what goes on it is entirely up to you. However, the exam board are saying in order to get the marks for this section, you need to be doing these things here that I've highlighted. So let me just talk you through this. So I decided to I've chosen the context of providing a safe and comfortable home. So the first thing I did is I went on the internet and I looked at what the definitions are. So for example, a home is defined as somewhere where someone lives, and safe and comfortable means secure an object, an item, prevent it from danger or risk. So that's the first thing I did. Now, based upon that, I then did a bit of a mind map. So I put my safe and comfortable in the middle. I then decided to write down, my thoughts around that based upon the little bit of research I've done already on the computer, sort of looking at the definitions. I've then sort of come up with some sort of problems that arise around there. So the first thing I looked at was the home. I identified what rooms there are. I looked at the hallway and went, right, okay, so what kind of problems exist in the hallway? Well, coats and shoes are a big issue. When you're walking from the house, especially if you're outside in the mud, you're going to want somewhere to put your shoes to dry or to keep them out of the way so you don't trip over them. You're going to want to hang up your wet coats or your umbrellas, etc. So I looked at that straight away. I also went down the route of bedrooms and thought, right, a child's bedroom inevitably has toys in. If you're like my son, they keep the toys everywhere. So maybe some sort of storage for toys will be really good. I looked at offices areas and looked at lighting with an office. So, for example, I know my eyes do hurt and I get bad eye strain if I'm not working in a well-lit area. So I sort of wrote those things down. So you can see I actually ended up circling the sort of ones that I thought, oh, that's quite an interesting sort of project to look at. And I wrote in red around the outside what kind of things exist around that sort of word. Now, that's a very brief mind map. That would have taken me anywhere between 10 minutes to maybe half an hour. You can spend as much time on this as possible or as much time as you want. You can do it digitally. I've decided to do mine by hand and then scan it in. Again, it's entirely up to you how you present your work and what it looks like, etc. And you don't necessarily have to do a mind map, but we'll come back to that later on. Now, based upon that mind map and the red writing that I decided that I sort of wrote down, I've sort of condensed that into a design problem. So if I was looking at, say, for example, this office problem of lighting, design problem 4, what I've done is I've written out in sentence form what the problem is. Now, you got to think about Dragon's Den here. So when they go on to Dragon's Den, they don't just say, this is my invention, I want £100,000 for 10% equity, give me your money. What they do is they come up and they might sing a song or they might do something to grab the dragon's attention. But they really pitch the problem to them. They really say, look, this problem is a massive issue. There's no product on the market like it at the moment. Or there might be a product on the market, but it's not good enough. I've come up, and they then say, look, I've invented this. Give me all your money for like 3% equity. So you need to do something similar. You need to explain what the problem is. So to read mine is, home offices are often spare rooms or basements that have been turned into places of work. The lighting is often not sufficient and causes people to strain their eyes in front of the screen. Spending a large amount of time staring at a screen in poor light can cause long-term eyesight problems. So you can see, look, I've actually explained what the problem is. Now, arguably, I could even go one step further and actually do some research around the science of that. I could get some maybe scientific report or some sort of doctor's report explaining the problems around eye strain to really drive home the problem there. Again, you can go into as much detail as you want to. It goes back to that sort of banding where it's a good investigation or a comprehensive investigation or an adequate. How much detail you go into depends on which band you're in. So you need to make sure you go into as much detail as possible. What I've then done is sort of gone through the rest of the problems. Some are a little bit more stronger than others. It's not up to me to make the decision, it's my client, but I've just come up with some design problems around the outside. So if I was going back to the mark scheme, I would say I've identified and thoroughly explored the design possibilities. I've explained the problems and opportunities that arise. So I've ticked that off, job done. So that's page 1 done for me. My second page is going to be about this user identification and investigating what they want and need and justifying those wants and needs. Now, I had a bit of space on my page 1, so I decided to add my client's sort of profile here. You can do it however you want. You can present it however you want. There's no sort of set definitive layout or presentation way. So my client is the Jones family. Based upon this safe and comfortable home, I've described, what kind of house they live in. I've described what they do for jobs, what the kids do. And based upon that conversation, I actually ended up talking to them about this spare room they have, which is what they've called the child's playroom, which is actually full of Lego Connects and building type toys. Now that's interesting because the dad is actually an architect. So I thought, okay, maybe there's a problem there. And I asked them about it, and they actually ended up telling me that the kids aren't very good at keeping the toys tidy. And you probably know what it's like to step on a Lego piece in the middle of the night. It's actually really painful. So, maybe there's a product there for me to sort of design and a problem to solve. So what I did after, I've sort of identified the client there. I've clearly identified a relevant client. And then what I've decided to move on to is identifying their wants and needs. So you can see, look, I've listed off in a client interview, 6 questions that I think are relevant based upon to find out the information that I need from the client. So I've got those 6 questions and I've written down the answers of what they've said. Now again, there is no definitive questions to ask. There are no sort of you need to ask this many questions or this type of question. The whole point is, are you asking the right questions either in an interview or a sort of survey, or even both? That'd be really good, both, and in your profile where you've profiled the client. Have you come up with their wants and needs based upon that information? So you can see, look, I've got these 5 wants and needs. Now this is initial, this will change as we go on, but you can see, look, I've got these wants and needs nice and clear based upon my client's interview. Then what I've decided to do is sort of explain to the examiner what's next. So I've decided to come up with this research plan. I've explained that I'm going to do some primary research, I'm going to do some secondary research. I'm going to gather information before I go back and start designing some products. So you can see I've listed off here what research I need to do. Now this is not a definitive list. For me, this list will change. It will probably get longer, and I don't need to do all of that list right now. I might design a few designs, go speak to my client, and then they might go, actually, I fancy this, and I might do some research based upon that. But what I've done initially is list off some things that I think are important based upon the user wants and needs, and I've given some timeline to it. I've also, in sort of interview, when they talked about doing this Lego storage, I started sort of writing down in a mind map form down the bottom here. I've sort of started coming up with what potential things I could think about. So, they're talking about a piece of furniture. Well, is that furniture a cupboard, a table? How big is it going to be? Is it going to have storage? What kind of storage? Is it going to be tubs? Is it going to be dividers with drawers? Is it going to be a trolley? What kind of play do they want to do on it? Do they want to do it off base plates using the minifigs? I don't know. There's loads of different things to think about. That mind map to me is kind of like helping me justify what my next steps are, because I'm just coming up with specific sort of problems that exist around that one design problem that my client has decided to go forward with. So based upon that, you can see, look, what I've done is on my first section, should we say, or little section, I've identified some design possibilities. I've told me what the problems and opportunities are. I've identified a client, clearly I've identified a client, and I've made sure it's a relevant client, an entirely relevant client. It's not just somebody that I've met off the street. It is someone that's genuinely got this problem. And I've investigated their wants and needs, and I've justified what their wants and needs are in my client interview. So within those first 2 pages, I've ticked off those sections straight away. So again, how much detail you go into is based upon how much what your band is going to inevitably be, and how much of the banding you're actually going to tick off. So I would say, I'm in this top band here, so maybe not 10 marks, but 9 marks I would definitely say, because I've done all these things. Like I said, back on page 1, I probably could have gone into a little bit more detail and explained, backed up some real evidence what this problem is, and maybe picked on a few more to really go into detail about before I go speak to my clients. But initially, I think I'm quite happy with that first setup. So you need to come up with those sections. You need to come up with those pages. Now, this could take you 5 pages. This could take you 1 page. And you could present it in any way you want to. To give you an idea of that, I've got a few examples that are going to go in the same mark band as what my first 2 pages were, but they've been presented slightly different, and they've gone about it in a different way. So this one was all about promoting a school subject. You can see that they've done a mind map around the outside of this. They've then written design problems underneath that mind map to explain what problems exist in that area. What they've then decided to do is then do a research plan here. They've then planned their time out here. They've done a profile here, and they've then interviewed their clients there. This then gives them this list of requirements at the bottom here. This person has written their context at the top. They've then, rather than do a mind map, they've then decided to sort of simply just write down in a list what their potential problems are. They've then picked on 3 design problems and explained how they could solve that problem based upon their information they've given. They've then told me what they're going to do next, and then they've profiled their client and written a questionnaire to their client, and then sort of done a sort of user wants and needs that way. So another different way, again, mind mapping, explaining what the sections are here, explaining a little bit more detail around those problems around the outside here in the white boxes. This person here has decided to explain what their sort of problem is. They've then gone into real detail about the problem. They've then sort of done some initial sort of research here already, and then come up with a sort of a requirement list there already as well. What they've then decided to move on to is a client interview, and they've even gone as far as doing a mood board at the top and sort of gone, look, this is what I've decided to do. This gives you an idea of the sort of lifestyle my client leads. So they've really gone into detail about who the client is and what they need from a product. So you can see, look, there are many different methods and loads of different ways of presenting and going about this first section. There is no distinctive way you have to do this and this page needs to look like this, etc. But you need to make sure you're focusing on these highlighted sections here in order to get the marks. Like I said, I would do a mind map or some sort of list. I would come up with design problems and really go into detail explaining what the problem is and what you could do to solve it. If anything, come up with quite a few different solutions to that problem. You need to identify a relevant client, so someone that's an expert in their field or someone that knows quite a lot about the area that you're investigating. You need to interview them or do some sort of survey or some sort of observation or whatever it needs to be in order to identify their needs and wants from a product. And then you need to justify, as in explain, why they need it. So if it's a kitchen product and it needs to be hygienic, you need to explain why it needs to be hygienic. If it's going to be a safe product, you need to explain why it's going to be safe or how, why it's important to be safe. So again, first 2-3 pages explaining the sections. It won't take you very long. In all, those first 2 pages took me roughly about 2.5 hours. So take your time with it, but focus on ticking off those sections of the mark scheme. Okay, good luck.